two men, two completely opposite worlds. One built an empire with a phrase, silver or lead. The other transformed entire industries with what his team called the reality distortion field. Pablo Escobar and Steve Jobs never met, but they shared something extraordinary, the ability to bend others' will to get exactly what they wanted. One used fear, the other vision. One destroyed options, the other created them. Today, we are going to analyze the most extreme negotiation tactics in modern history, and you'll discover what separates temporary power from eternal legacy. Pablo Escobar was born in 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, into a lower middle-class family. From a young age, he showed unbridled ambition and a complete absence of moral limits. He started by stealing tombstones from cemeteries to resell them, then moved on to cigarette smuggling and finally found his true business, cocaine. In the mid-1970s, Escobar identified an opportunity that others didn't see clearly. The United States had a growing demand for cocaine, and he had the contacts, audacity, and brutality necessary to satisfy it on an industrial scale. In less than a decade, Pablo Escobar built the Medellin cartel, an organization that at its peak controlled 80% of the world's cocaine traffic. His personal fortune was estimated at $30 billion, making him one of the richest men on the planet. But his wealth didn't come solely from business acumen. It came from a simple and terrifying philosophy: plata o plomo, silver or lead, bribery or death. There was no third option. This phrase became his ultimate negotiation tool. Judges, politicians, journalists, and police officers faced the same dilemma: accept the money and cooperate, or reject it and die. Escobar built power through systematic terror. He murdered more than 4,000 people, including hundreds of police officers, a presidential candidate, and detonated a commercial airplane killing 110 passengers. His message was clear: opposing him meant death, not only for you, but for your entire family. This tactic gave him absolute control over entire regions of Colombia. He ruled from the shadows, but his influence was total. However, this power had an expiration date. Steve Jobs was born in 1955 in San Francisco, California. He was given up for adoption and grew up in a working-class family in Silicon Valley. As a teenager, he showed a fascination with technology and design. In 1976, together with Steve Wozniak, he founded Apple Computer in his parents' garage. His vision was simple but revolutionary: to put a computer in the hands of every person on the planet. In 1980, Apple went public and Jobs became a millionaire at 25. But his ambition wasn't money. It was to change the world. He launched the Macintosh in 1984 with an advertising campaign that redefined the industry. However, his leadership style was brutal. He demanded absolute perfection, rejected the concept of impossibility, and fired anyone who didn't share his vision. In 1985, Apple's board of directors expelled him from his own company. Jobs spent 11 years in the wilderness, founding NextT and buying Pixar. But in 1997, Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy and called him back. What followed was one of the most spectacular comebacks in corporate history. Jobs launched the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. He transformed not only Apple but music, telecommunications, and personal computing. When he died in 2011, Apple was the most valuable company on the planet. Plata o plomo wasn't just a phrase. It was a complete negotiation system designed to eliminate all resistance. The literal translation is simple. Plata means silver money. Lead means lead bullet. But its true meaning was much deeper. It was the absolute elimination of free will. There was no room to negotiate terms, to ask for time, to seek alternatives. Only two paths existed, and Escobar controlled both. The effectiveness of this tactic resided in its brutal clarity. When one of Escobar's hitmen appeared before a judge, politician, or journalist, the message was crystal clear. Accept the money and do what we ask, or you die. And you don't die alone. Your family too. Your children. Your parents. This expansion of the threat beyond the individual exponentially multiplied its power. You weren't making a decision just for yourself. You were deciding for everyone you loved. The amounts Escobar offered were strategically calculated. They weren't symbolic quantities. They were fortunes that changed lives. A judge who earned $500 a month received offers of $100,000. A police officer with a salary of $200 monthly could receive $50,000. These figures weren't bribes, they were complete economic transformations. Escobar understood that for many, especially in a country with structural poverty, rejecting that money was rejecting their children's future. But the true dark genius of silver or lead lay in its public implementation. Escobar didn't always negotiate privately. He often made public demonstrations. When Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla rejected his bribes and began pursuing him, Escobar had him assassinated in broad daylight in 1984. The message to all other officials was unequivocal. This is what happens when you choose lead. Presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan, who flatly refused to negotiate with drug traffickers, was assassinated in front of thousands of people in 1989. More than 1,000 police officers were murdered during Escobar's war against the Colombian state. Every death was a message. Every assassination was a negotiation with everyone who remained alive. The implicit question was always the same. Do you want to be the next martyr, or do you prefer the silver? This tactic gave Escobar unprecedented territorial and political control. He got Colombia to modify its constitution to prohibit extradition. He built his own prison called La Cathedral, where he lived in luxury while supposedly serving his sentence. He controlled routes, ports, airports, and borders. For years, the Colombian government negotiated with him on his terms. But silver or lead had a fundamental weakness. It was unsustainable. Every threat carried out generated more enemies. Every assassination increased international pressure. Every bomb strengthened the determination of those who refused to yield. Power built on pure terror requires constant and escalating terror. And eventually, the system collapses. Escobar died riddled with bullets in 1993, hunted like an animal. His empire disintegrated in months. His ultimate negotiation tactic destroyed him. The term reality distortion field was coined by Bud Tribble, an engineer on the original Macintosh team, inspired by a Star Trek episode where aliens create alternate realities through pure mental force. Tribble used this metaphor to describe Steve Jobs' supernatural ability to convince anyone of virtually anything. It wasn't hyperbole. It was the literal description of what those who worked with him experienced. The distortion field worked through a precise combination of psychological elements. First, Jobs possessed absolute conviction in his vision. When he talked to you about a product, he wasn't selling an idea. He was describing an inevitable future that only he could see clearly. This certainty was contagious. People began to see what he saw, not because he manipulated facts, but because his conviction was so intense that it redefined what was possible. Andy Hertzfeld, another Macintosh engineer, described how Jobs arrived one day and told them that the computer's boot time needed to be reduced by 10 seconds. The team explained it was technically impossible. Jobs responded with a simple question. If saving a person's life depended on the system booting 10 seconds faster, could you find a way? Hertzfeld fell silent. Jobs continued. If there are 5 million people using Macintosh, and the system boots 10 seconds faster, that's equivalent to saving 100 lives per year. Does that justify the effort? 3 weeks later, the team had reduced boot time by 28 seconds. This anecdote reveals the internal mechanics of the distortion field. Jobs didn't threaten. He didn't bribe. He completely reframed the frame of reference. He transformed a technical problem into a moral mission. He made the impossible inevitable through pure reality redefinition. And he did it with a mixture of charisma, intense eye contact, and rhetoric designed to deactivate objections before they formed. When he presented the iPhone in 2007, the device still had critical bugs. The engineering team was terrified of the public demonstration. Jobs rehearsed the exact path of the presentation, touching icons in a specific order that avoided the bugs. During the presentation, he showed the phone as if it were a finished and perfect product. The audience didn't see a problematic prototype. They saw the future of technology. That was distortion at its maximum expression. Presenting what will be as if it already were. With suppliers and partners, Jobs used the same tactic. When Corning Glass told him they couldn't produce the specialized glass for the iPhone in 6 months, Jobs simply responded, "Don't be afraid. You'll do it." And Corning did, reconfiguring an entire plant. When record labels said they would never sell individual songs for 99 cents, Jobs convinced them by showing them a future where they controlled digital distribution or disappeared. iTunes was born from that distortion. The reality distortion field wasn't cheap manipulation. It was visionary leadership taken to the extreme. Jobs made people believe in superior versions of themselves. He pushed them beyond their self-perceived limits. And yes, many on his team suffered burnout, resentment, and exhaustion. But they also created products that changed the world. The distortion had real costs, but also impossible results. At first glance, Pablo Escobar and Steve Jobs have nothing in common. One led a criminal cartel, the other a technology company. One murdered, the other innovated. But if we look beyond the surface, both mastered the same fundamental art, bending human will to achieve results that seemed impossible. The difference wasn't in their capacity for influence, but in the direction of that influence. Both were absolute masters of persuasion. Escobar convinced judges, politicians, and journalists to betray their principles. Jobs convinced engineers, designers, and executives to achieve the technically impossible. Both created their own realities where normal rules didn't apply. In Escobar's world, the law was negotiable. In Jobs' world, physics was negotiable. Both rejected no as a valid answer. And both generated extreme loyalty in their inner circles, though for radically different reasons. But here the crucial differences begin. Escobar eliminated options. His negotiation was binary, silver or lead. Two paths, both under his control. Jobs expanded possibilities. His negotiation was visionary. This is what we can create together if we set aside artificial limitations. Escobar closed the doors. Jobs opened them. One reduced the universe of decisions until only his will remained. The other expanded the universe of the possible until his vision became irresistible. Escobar's primary tool was fear, systematic and public terror. Every bomb, every assassination, every fulfilled threat fed his power. He needed fear to be constant, visible, and scalable. Jobs, on the other hand, used inspiration as his engine. He painted futures so attractive that people wanted to inhabit them. He didn't threaten to destroy careers. He promised to build legacies. The difference is fundamental. Fear paralyzes or forces, inspiration mobilizes and transforms. Escobar operated in the short term. His time horizon was immediate survival and present territorial control. Every decision sought to maintain power today, regardless of tomorrow's consequences. Jobs thought in decades. When he launched the Macintosh, he knew it would take years to change the industry. When he created the iPod, he was planting the path toward the iPhone. His game was to build ecosystems that would last generations. One built empires of sand, the other foundations of steel. When someone said no to Escobar, that person ceased to exist. Rejection was a terminal act. When someone said no to Jobs, a conversion campaign began. Jobs returned with new arguments, different angles, and better information. He persisted until transforming the no into yes. Destruction versus conversion. Elimination versus transformation. Both tactics require power, but only one builds something lasting. Finally, there's the legacy. Escobar died at 44, hunted and hated. His empire collapsed immediately. Colombia still bears the scars of his violence. Jobs died at 56, globally admired. Apple became the most valuable company on the planet. 1 billion people use his products daily. One left ruins. The other left revolutions. The difference between them isn't in their ability to negotiate, but in what they negotiated and for what purpose. The story of these two men isn't entertainment. It's a covert negotiation manual. But to extract the right lessons, we need to separate what worked from why it worked and what seemed to work from what eventually destroyed everything. Let's start with Escobar. The first lesson is clear. When you eliminate real options, you're not negotiating. You're imposing. Silver or lead seems like a choice, but it's an illusion. Both options are controlled by whoever makes the offer. In business, when you reduce your counterpart's alternatives to the point where they can only accept or self-destruct, you won the battle but lost the war. Because that person will never be your ally. They'll be your hostage, and hostages escape or rebel as soon as they can. The second lesson from Escobar, power based exclusively on fear is unsustainable. It requires constantly increasing the level of threat. You need to be more brutal today than yesterday, and more brutal tomorrow than today. Because fear wears off, becomes normalized, and eventually generates so much resistance that it collapses the entire system. In the corporate world, we see this with authoritarian leaders who generate short-term results through intimidation, but destroy organizational culture and end up surrounded by mediocrity or silent sabotage. The third lesson: tactical victories can be strategic defeats. Escobar won thousands of individual negotiations. Every judge bought, every politician intimidated, every journalist silenced was a victory. But each victory fed the coalition of enemies that eventually destroyed him. He won battles constantly and lost the war definitively. In business, this translates to securing Leonine contracts that ruin relationships, closing sales through excessive pressure that generates massive cancellations, or imposing conditions that work today but exclude you from the market tomorrow. Now the lessons from Jobs. The first, radical conviction is contagious. When you deeply believe in your vision, you don't need to convince through logical arguments alone. Your certainty is transmitted. But attention, it's not blind arrogance. Jobs studied obsessively. He knew every technical detail, every market trend, every user's needs. His conviction didn't come from inflated ego. It came from exhaustive preparation combined with clear vision. The second lesson, painting the future beats explaining the present. Jobs didn't sell technical specifications. He sold how your life would feel with that product. He didn't just negotiate commercial terms. He negotiated belonging to something greater. When he told John Scully, then CEO of Pepsi, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world?" he wasn't offering a job. He was offering transcendence. That is negotiation at its highest expression. The third lesson, intelligent perseverance beats brute force. Jobs didn't accept a no, but he didn't destroy whoever gave it to him either. He came back with better arguments, new data, and different approaches. He converted resistance into alliance through strategic persistence. And here's the critical distinction between persuasion and manipulation. Jobs wanted both parties to win. Escobar only wanted himself to win. One created shared value. The other extracted value through coercion. That difference defines everything. All this analysis is useless if it can't be translated into concrete actions for a business. So how do you apply the reality distortion field without falling into the destructive tactics of silver or lead? Here's the practical manual. In sales, you must stop selling features and start selling transformation. When Jobs presented the iPod, he didn't say it has 5 gigabytes of storage. He said 1,000 songs in your pocket. The difference is abysmal. One is a technical fact. The other is a new reality. The application is clear. Before the next commercial meeting, write in one sentence how the client's life will be different after working together. With your team, you must paint the mission, not just the task. Jobs didn't ask his team to make better computers. He asked them to democratize technology and change how humanity thinks. A development team isn't writing code. They're building the tool that will allow thousands of people to achieve something they can't today. A customer service team doesn't resolve complaints. They're protecting the reputation built over years. Reframing the frame converts work into mission. And people give their best for missions, not for tasks. In negotiations with suppliers or partners, use the shared future tactic. Jobs didn't threaten record labels with iTunes. He showed them a future where they had two options: adapt and prosper, or resist and disappear to piracy. But the crucial thing is that he offered to be the bridge to a better future. The application. When negotiating, don't just present your own position. Present two possible futures. In one, you work together and both win. In the other, each goes their own way and both lose opportunities. Then ask, which of these futures do we want to build? That is applied reality distortion. With customers, you must create experiences that systematically exceed expectations. Jobs obsessed over every detail, from how the box opened to the sound of button clicks. It wasn't empty perfectionism. It was a deliberate construction of a reality where the product isn't a purchase. It's a memorable experience. Identify the 3 most important touch points in your commercial process. Now ask yourself, What unexpected detail can you add that makes the customer think these people understand something others don't? But here come the red lines you must never cross. First, powerful persuasion expands options. It doesn't eliminate them. If the negotiation makes the other party feel they have no way out, you're using silver or lead, not the distortion field. Second, ethics are non-negotiable. Jobs distorted perceptions about what's possible, but he didn't lie about what existed. If you need to deceive to close, the product or service has a structural problem. Third, build sustainable power. If your influence depends on keeping others in a position of weakness, you're replicating Escobar's model. Real power comes from creating so much value that others want to work with you, not from them having no alternative. Reality distortion works when the reality you're distorting is genuinely better for everyone. That's the difference between Steve Jobs and Pablo Escobar. And it's the difference between building a business or building a time bomb. Two negotiation tactics that marked eras. One offered silver or lead, the other a reality distorted toward the impossible. Both got what they wanted, but only one built something that transcended his own life. True mastery in negotiation isn't enforcing wills, it's in transforming them. Not in eliminating options, but in expanding possibilities. Not in generating fear, but in inspiring vision. Escobar subjugated people. Jobs elevated them. One destroyed futures. The other created them. The question isn't whether you have the power to influence others. The question is, what reality are you building with that power? Are you closing doors or opening them? Are you imposing your will or sharing your vision? Are you building an empire of sand or a legacy of steel? In business, as in life, the strategy you choose doesn't just define your results. It defines who you are. And in the end, when everything collapses or when everything transcends, that will be the only difference that matters. If this analysis made you think differently about negotiation and strategy, give me a like. It helps more entrepreneurs and business owners find this content. Subscribe to the channel if you want more comparisons like this. Opposite strategies, real lessons, practical applications. We upload content every week. And tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a negotiation where you felt you had no options? How did you handle it? See you in the next video.